8-year-old girl thought she was just a kind, homeless old woman who gave her candy. But when she was taken by police and a paper fell from her pocket, the girl read a phrase that changed everything she knew about her missing mother. Before we begin, take a second to subscribe, tap the notification bell, and leave a like if stories like this touch your heart. And tell me, where are you watching from? Which city? Which country? I'd love to know where these stories are reaching. Your support means the world. Thank you. Now let's begin our story. The girl's fingers trembled as the cold wind rushed through the empty bus station. Her eyes searched for the old woman who always waited with a candy and a smile. But today, only silence remained, until flashing lights arrived and a single crumpled paper on the ground changed everything she believed. Bailey Nelson was 8 years old when she first noticed the old woman at the bus station offering her a small piece of candy. The bus station itself was a drab grey structure on the outskirts of their suburban neighborhood, a place people hurried through without a second glance. Yet every morning, while Bailey stood waiting for the school bus with her father, Russell, and her stepmother, Margot, she observed that same woman sitting quietly on a wooden bench. She wore layers of worn-out clothes and clutched a battered shopping cart filled with blankets, plastic bags, and newspapers. Bailey couldn't say exactly why she found the woman fascinating, but something about her gentle expression, her soft smile, made Bailey feel safe. While other kids looked away or teased the homeless lady, Bailey felt compelled to engage. One cold winter morning, Bailey stepped forward, cheeks rosy from the chill, and accepted the candy that the woman silently held out. To her surprise, the wrapper smelled faintly of caramel and fresh milk, like the homemade treats she had tasted only once or twice in her life, back when her father was briefly unemployed and they'd spent more time together in the kitchen. Russell usually flicked his eyes over the woman without acknowledging her. He was a quiet man who pretended not to see certain things, perhaps because noticing them required taking action. Margot, on the other hand, was the type who stood ramrod straight, whispering about unsightly vagrants and why the city didn't do something to remove them. For Bailey, her stepmother's bitterness only deepened the strange warmth she felt toward the old woman, who soon became the vovo of the bus station in Bailey's mind, though she never said the word out loud. The first time the woman looked Bailey in the eye and spoke, her voice was low and tentative. "Hello there," she said softly, passing her a caramel that smelled exactly like sweetened condensed milk. "I made these myself." Then her lips curved into a smile, revealing a gap where a front tooth should be. "I see you have a red backpack. It suits you." "Thank you," Bailey replied, feeling both curious and nervous. She wanted to ask the woman's name, but Margot tugged her arm, muttering, "Come along, Bailey. Don't talk to strangers." At school that morning, Bailey couldn't stop thinking about the candy. Her teacher asked her to focus on the math assignment, yet her thoughts wandered back to the woman's soft, warm gaze. There was something about that encounter she found comforting, almost familiar. Days turned into weeks. Each morning the woman would offer Bailey a small wrapped sweet, whispering a new kind word. "Stay warm, dear," or "Make sure you eat lunch today," or "I like your pigtails." The tiny compliments and the gentle tone made Bailey feel special, as if someone truly saw her in a way her father and Margot never did. Russell was overwhelmed with his job as a mechanic at the local automotive plant, while Margot spent her days criticizing or fussing about superficial matters. Once, Bailey timidly asked, "Why do you always carry that shopping cart?" The old woman paused, then answered, "It's all I have to hold on to what's left of my life." That response struck Bailey as both tragic and meaningful. She wished she could sit down next to the woman, ask her about every facet of her story. But the bus always arrived, and Margot always glared. One chilly Friday afternoon, Bailey lingered at the station after school. Usually, she took a bus from her elementary campus back home, but that day, she had permission to stay with a friend until 4. As the sky darkened, she found herself alone on the bench, except for the old woman. The lady offered another piece of candy, then surprised Bailey by gently patting her backpack. "You remind me of someone I used to know," she said. Bailey's heart thumped. "Who?" she wanted to ask. But the woman simply gave a distant smile, her eyes welling with an unspoken emotion. "Someone very dear," was all she said before rising and quietly walking toward the far side of the station, pushing her cart along. Bailey watched her figure retreat, feeling a pang of longing in her chest. That night back at home, the tension between Bailey and Margot flared when Margot noticed a homemade caramel in Bailey's hand. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her tone sharp. Bailey hesitated. "From the lady at the bus station. She's really nice and—" Margot huffed in disgust. "I don't want you talking to her, do you understand? You have no idea who that person might be or why she's hanging around. She could be dangerous." Russell tried to diffuse the situation. "Margot, calm down. She's just a lonely old woman, I'm sure." But he said it with a weariness that suggested he didn't really want to explore the matter further. Bailey noticed his face was tense, as if he recognized something in her story that he wished to bury. That night, Bailey lay awake in her small bedroom, staring at a water stain on the ceiling while cradling the caramel in her hand. She thought about how the woman's eyes gleamed with an unspoken sadness and how her father had seemed unusually anxious, as though the mention of this stranger triggered some hidden concern. Bailey tried to recall if she had ever seen that old woman around the neighborhood before. But no, the bus station was the only place they ever crossed paths. As the clock ticked past 10, Bailey's mind swarmed with questions. Why did the woman's homemade candy taste oddly familiar? Why did she speak like she recognized Bailey? And why did her father look so uneasy whenever the woman came up in conversation? In the weeks to come, Bailey would discover that the old woman on the bench was far more than a kind stranger. She was a part of her past, carrying secrets that could either heal or break her small family. And everything would change the day the police arrived to remove someone they assumed no one cared about. A cold drizzle was falling when Bailey stepped off the school bus late one afternoon. Russell had left a note saying he'd be working overtime, so she would have to make her own way home. She wrapped a scarf around her neck and hurried along the damp sidewalk toward the familiar bus station, where she often found solace in the old woman's gentle presence. Today, though, the atmosphere felt tense. She saw 2 uniformed police officers standing near the bench, their posture stiff as they talked to the old woman. Even from a distance, Bailey could sense confrontation. One of the officers gestured toward a sign that read, "No loitering." The other officer took out a notepad, scribbling something as he spoke in a stern voice. "Ma'am, you can't stay here," said one of them. "We've received complaints that you've been sleeping on this bench at night. It's against municipal code. We'll have to take you to a shelter, or, if you resist, you're facing a citation." The old woman looked frail against the imposing figures of the officers. Clutching her cart, she bowed her head, as though she were used to being dismissed or forcibly moved. Bailey froze, heart pounding. She had never seen her friend, if she could call her that, in such distress. With timid steps, she walked closer, wanting to speak up, but unsure of what to say. One of the officers noticed Bailey. "Miss, you should probably go home. This doesn't concern you." He tried to wave her off, but Bailey stood her ground. A shaky voice escaped her lips. "She's not hurting anyone, sir. She just gives me candy sometimes." "Candy?" The officer sounded almost surprised. Then he frowned. "Still, this bench isn't a residence. We have to enforce the rules." The old woman shot Bailey a sorrowful look. Her eyes glistened with tears she fought to hold back. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to trouble anyone." As she began gathering her belongings, it started to rain harder. Suddenly, Margot arrived. She must have driven by and spotted the commotion. She rushed over, grabbing Bailey's wrist. "I told you not to talk to strangers," Margot hissed. Then she addressed the police. "Officers, thank you for removing this nuisance. We've been worried about our child's safety." Bailey was stunned by her stepmother's words, so cold, so final. She tried to pull away, but Margot's grip tightened. The police nodded to each other, then gently but firmly guided the old woman toward their patrol car. Bailey watched, helpless, as they opened the back door to put her inside. The woman clung to her cart until the last moment, but an officer took it away. In that struggle, something slipped from the cart, a folded piece of paper, which landed in a small puddle. Bailey, acting on instinct, wriggled free from Margot's grasp. She dashed forward, stooping to pick up the wet paper. Before anyone could stop her, she tucked it into her coat pocket. The old woman called out in a voice that shook with urgency, "Catherine, tell Catherine." But the words were cut off by the slam of the car door. Margot pulled Bailey back. "Let's go now," she snapped. The next thing Bailey knew, the patrol car was gone, and the bench looked impossibly empty under the drizzling rain. Her mind whirled. She had never seen the old woman so distraught, had never heard her mention any name with such desperation. Catherine. That was the name her family never allowed her to speak. The name of Bailey's biological mother, the ghost in her father's stories, the taboo subject in her house. In the car, Margot lectured Bailey about following rules and staying away from vagrants. Russell was nowhere around. Bailey sat in the back seat, quiet, her hands trembling as she pressed on the damp folded paper in her pocket. She felt a swirl of dread and curiosity. How did that woman know Catherine's name? Back home, Margot scurried about, preparing dinner and making phone calls, but Bailey slipped away to her bedroom. She carefully removed the paper from her coat. It was crumpled and water-stained, but one line stood out, written in shaky penmanship. "Tell my granddaughter I never forgot her." Next to it, a phone number was scribbled, partially smeared by the rain. Bailey's breath caught. Granddaughter. That had to mean her, right? She reread the note, heart pounding. The reference to Catherine was no coincidence. Catherine was Bailey's missing mother, the one who had supposedly abandoned Bailey as an infant. So why did this old woman claim to be connected to her? Could she be Bailey's grandmother or someone else entirely? She tried the phone number on her father's old landline phone that evening, but it rang endlessly without answer. No voicemail, no recorded greeting, just a void. Bailey hung up, feeling more uncertain than ever. She recalled the woman's frightened plea in front of the police. "Tell Catherine." Something about the sadness in her voice haunted Bailey's thoughts. That night, Russell returned from work, looking exhausted. Margot told him about the police incident, spinning it to sound like a vagrant had been harassing Bailey. Russell sighed and rubbed his temples, nodding along but keeping his gaze averted from Bailey, as though avoiding any deeper conversation. In her room, Bailey pondered how her father had always been evasive when it came to her mother's story. If this old woman truly knew something about Catherine, wouldn't it mean that everything Bailey had been told might not be the full truth? The idea was both terrifying and oddly exhilarating. She wanted answers, but she feared what those answers might be. When Bailey finally fell asleep, she dreamed of the bus station deserted under a moonlit sky. The bench was empty, a single caramel wrapper fluttering on the ground. She heard a distant echo of the old woman's voice, "Catherine, Catherine." A sense of longing and urgency pulsed through her dream, leaving her heart pounding when she awoke. She decided she couldn't just let this go. She needed to find out who that woman really was, and how she knew so much about a mother Bailey had never even met. Bailey awoke the next morning with a knot in her stomach. determined to uncover the truth behind the note and the name Catherine. She tiptoed through the house before dawn, listening to the steady hum of the heater and the muted snores of her father in the adjacent room. Margot was nowhere to be seen, likely still asleep. She gripped the slip of paper tightly, recalling the old woman's desperate expression. Something was off about the whole story. Bailey had spent years hearing that her mother left because she couldn't handle the responsibility, yet the old woman's words implied a different narrative altogether. Downstairs in the kitchen, the light was dim and grey. Bailey poured herself some cereal, but every spoonful tasted bland. Her mind was elsewhere. Eventually, she placed the note on the table, smoothing out its wrinkled edges. "Tell my granddaughter I never forgot her." The phone number was partly smeared, and Bailey's attempt to call had led nowhere. She rechecked the digits. Maybe she misread something. That's when Russell walked in, yawning. He blinked at the piece of paper. "What's that?" he asked, voice still scratchy from sleep. In a quick motion, Bailey slid it under her cereal bowl. "Nothing, just some math homework," she lied. The look on her father's face flickered with suspicion, but he let it go. He grabbed a mug of coffee and wandered off, leaving Bailey alone once more. After breakfast, she remembered a day from years ago. She was about 5, rummaging in the basement and stumbling upon a cardboard box labeled Kathy's Things. Margot had yanked her away, scolding that it was junk from the past. Now Bailey felt a surge of daring. She would search the basement again. Maybe there was something hidden that could connect the dots. She waited until Russell left for work and Margot for her volunteer shift at the local library. Then, with her heart thumping, Bailey descended the creaking basement steps. The air smelled musty, filled with dust motes swirling in the faint light from a single overhead bulb. Boxes were stacked haphazardly along the walls. She recognized some from old holidays, but one small trunk in the far corner caught her eye, an antique chest with tarnished metal latches. Curiosity propelled her forward. She tried opening it only to find it locked. Disappointed, she turned to search elsewhere. That's when she spotted another cardboard box with old cookbooks scrawled on it in black marker. Sliding it open, she saw battered recipe binders and hand-scribbled instructions. Underneath, in a plastic sleeve, lay a spiral-bound notebook titled Catherine L. Sweets and Treats. Bailey's pulse quickened. She flipped through the pages, carefully absorbing each recipe: fudge squares, peanut brittle, caramel chews. On the margin of the caramel recipe, a note read, "For my little sweet pea. One day, I'll make these just for you." The handwriting was slanted, feminine, and it tugged at Bailey's heart. Could Catherine have written this for her? Tears threatened to form. Suddenly, footsteps echoed above. Panicked, Bailey shoved the notebook into her backpack and quickly closed the box. She switched off the light and hurried up the stairs. In the hallway, she nearly collided with Margot, who was home earlier than expected. "What are you doing down there?" Margot asked, narrowing her eyes. Bailey's mind raced. "Looking for an old coloring book," she said hastily. "I remembered we used to keep them in the basement." Margot sniffed the air, suspicious, but let the matter drop. She had groceries in her arms and seemed more concerned with putting them away than interrogating Bailey further. Once in her bedroom, Bailey studied the recipe notebook in secret. She noted every mention of candy that matched the taste of what the old woman gave her. The descriptions matched perfectly: fresh milk, melted butter, a sprinkle of sugar, stirred for exactly 7 minutes. The familiarity of it brought a lump to her throat. She was sure the old woman's candy was the same recipe from this notebook. In school that day, Bailey caught herself daydreaming through her classes, consumed by thoughts of Catherine's recipe book. During recess, she retreated to the library and tried to find any phone directories or local records. She was too young to fully comprehend how to research properly, but a sliver of determination pushed her to figure out something, anything, about a woman named Edna or the phone number on the note. But it was all a dead end. No listings, no addresses that matched her partial knowledge. Bailey felt the weight of secrets pressing down on her. She remembered the old woman's voice shaking as she said, "Tell Catherine," right before being taken away. Then the scribbled line about a granddaughter. The pieces were forming an image that Bailey couldn't fully see yet, but it was enough to keep her motivated. That evening, once again, Bailey tried to talk to Russell about her mother. "Dad, can we discuss Catherine? I found a recipe book." He cut her off, face paling. "Bailey, we've been over this. Your mother left us. It's not something I enjoy revisiting. Please, just drop it." "But Dad," she pressed, her frustration growing. "I think there's more to it. She loved making candy, right?" Russell's jaw tightened. "That's enough," he said firmly, standing up to leave the room. Bailey watched him go, tears of anger and sadness welling. Why was he so determined to bury the past? And why did she feel certain that the old woman's fate was tied to the same story? Alone in her bedroom, Bailey took out the recipe notebook and traced her finger over the lines of cursive that spelled out Catherine L. She whispered, "Mom, where are you?" The question lingered like a plea in the silent house. Bailey knew she had to keep searching for the truth and for the old woman who might be her only link to a family she never knew. Early Saturday morning, Bailey felt a sudden urge to revisit the bus station. A restlessness in her chest wouldn't let her sit still, even though Margot insisted she do her chores first. After quickly finishing the dishes, Bailey bundled up in her coat and slipped out the front door before anyone could protest. The bus station was quieter on weekends, with fewer commuters hurrying through. The bench where the old woman used to sit looked painfully empty. As Bailey walked around, she noticed the battered shopping cart leaning against a chain-link fence nearby, but there was no sign of its owner. Police tape fluttered from a post, a reminder of the confrontation just days before. Sighing, Bailey was about to leave when a voice startled her. "Looking for someone?" She turned to see a tall, lanky man in a faded uniform jacket. Al, the security guard who oversaw the station's premises. He had kind eyes, though lines of weariness crossed his forehead. Bailey nodded. "There was an old lady who sat here. The police took her. I thought maybe she'd come back." Al scratched his chin. "Yeah, I saw that. Poor woman Edna, if I recall. She used to say your smile made her day." Hearing her name confirmed as Edna sent a jolt through Bailey. "Do you know where they took her?" He shrugged. "Usually, they'd drive someone like that to a shelter downtown, but I don't know more." She was quiet, except when she spoke about the candy she made for her granddaughter. Granddaughter, the word hung between them, brimming with unspoken truths. Bailey's pulse quickened. "Did she leave anything else behind?" Al motioned to the ragged cart. "She left that. Might have some stuff in it, but the police said they'd come by to pick it up later. They got bigger concerns than an abandoned cart, I guess." A sense of urgency seized Bailey. She edged closer to the cart. It was filled with blankets, a worn pillow, and a plastic bag bulging with random trinkets. Empty candy wrappers, small containers, a broken radio. Carefully, she rummaged inside, feeling the distinct sense that she was invading someone's private life. Then her hand brushed against a small notebook taped to the metal frame. She tugged at it gently until it came loose. "Anything helpful?" Al asked, his tone more curious than suspicious. "I'm not sure," Bailey murmured, flipping open the notebook. It contained scribbles, dates, times, words, none of which made immediate sense, but one entry stood out. "Saw her again. My granddaughter. Red backpack. She looks so big now. Catherine would be proud." Bailey's chest tightened. It was proof. The old woman was convinced that Bailey was her granddaughter. Could she really be Bailey's grandmother? She felt a swirl of emotions. Confusion, hope, anxiety. She thanked Al and quickly tucked the notebook into her coat, promising to return the cart if she learned anything new. At home, she hid in her bedroom and began deciphering Edna's notes more carefully. They spanned months, possibly years. Each page chronicled short observations. Russell looked at me today, but he seemed afraid. "Margot almost recognized me. I'm worried." "Catherine, oh my sweet child, if only I could tell Bailey the truth." Tears gathered in Bailey's eyes as she realized the old woman had been watching her all this time, leaving Candy, hoping for a chance to speak. Her father must have known who Edna was. Why else would he avoid the bus station conversation so vehemently? She recalled something from the basement, the locked chest. If Edna was truly her grandmother, maybe that chest held more secrets about Catherine's disappearance. The mere thought of it sent an electric thrill through Bailey. She slipped the notebook under her pillow and waited for the right moment to sneak downstairs. That night, while Russell dozed in front of the television and Margot took a phone call in the kitchen, Bailey tiptoed to the basement. Flicking on the light, she headed straight for the locked chest in the corner. The metal latch felt stubborn beneath her fingertips. She jiggled it, but it wouldn't budge. Frustrated, she stepped back and scanned the area. Tucked behind a stack of paint cans, she found a rusted screwdriver. It took several tense minutes of prying, but eventually the latch gave way with a metallic snap. Her heart pounded as she lifted the lid. Inside, she saw old letters, some photographs, a baby blanket, and a single photograph of a young woman cradling an infant. There was no caption, but Bailey's gut told her she was looking at Catherine and herself as a newborn. Beside it lay a pair of hospital wristbands labeled C.L. Nelson and Infant Girl. She noticed a folded document that read, "Petition for Custody." Bailey's throat went dry. She skimmed the text. Edna L., mother of Catherine L., sought custody of Bailey, citing that Russell could not provide a stable environment. But the petition was never completed. Someone had scrawled void across it. A noise from above nearly made Bailey drop the papers. She quickly returned everything to the chest, though she pocketed the photograph. Thoughts raced through her mind. Her grandmother had tried to gain custody. She'd been ignored, or perhaps blocked. It seemed her father had a more complicated role in Catherine's disappearance than he admitted. Those revelations left Bailey reeling. Why had Russell refused Edna's plea? Was Catherine deemed unfit? And if so, was it truly her own failing or a fabrication created by the family? Before she could puzzle it out, Margot's voice echoed from the top of the stairs, calling her name. Bailey clamped the trunk shut, heart hammering. She flicked off the basement light and forced a calm expression onto her face. As she climbed back up, the pieces of the puzzle churned in her head. An old woman named Edna, who claimed to be her grandmother, a mother named Catherine, who supposedly abandoned her, and a father who buried every trace of the past. That night, Bailey lay awake, staring at the photo of the young woman holding a baby. She whispered, "Mom," letting the words settle into the silence. Then she remembered Edna's words in the station. "Tell Catherine." Bailey's imagination conjured possibilities of why Catherine wasn't around. Could she be locked away, or had she run off? Bailey felt that the truth was within reach, but tangled in decades of sorrow, regret, and secrets. Monday arrived with a swirl of autumn leaves drifting across the schoolyard. Bailey clutched her backpack straps as she navigated the hallway toward Ms. Dunley's office, her determination fueled by the need for answers. Ms. Dunley, the school's principal, was reputed to have worked there for decades. If anyone had records or memories of Catherine, it would be her. As Bailey entered, Ms. Dunley looked up from a stack of paperwork. She was a petite woman in her 60s, with hair neatly tied into a bun and reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. "Bailey, dear, do you need something?" Her tone was warm. Bailey closed the door gently behind her, heart pounding. Miss Dunley, can I ask you about someone named Catherine? Catherine L. She might have been a student here a long time ago." The principal removed her glasses, leaning back in her chair. "Catherine L. That name rings a bell, but I need more context. Why do you ask?" Trying to be courageous, Bailey placed the photograph of Catherine holding the baby on Miss Dunley's desk. "This is my mother," she whispered. "I think. People say she abandoned me, but I don't think that's the whole story. And there's this older woman named Edna. She might be my grandmother. I'm not sure. I just need to know if the school has any records that could help me." A flicker of recognition crossed Miss Dunley's face as she studied the photograph. Yes, Catherine L. She was a bright student here, talented in home economics, always talked about opening her own bakery one day. But she left the school abruptly. Some scandal or family crisis. Let me check something. Miss Dunley guided Bailey to a narrow storage room behind the main office. Stacks of old yearbooks, files, and class rosters filled shelves. She rummaged through a labeled box, pulling out a tattered folder. Inside were yellowed papers, including transcripts, attendance records, and notes from teachers. Toward the back was a single typed document. Withdrawal of enrollment. Catherine L. It was dated around the time Bailey would have been born. "Here it is," Miss Dunley said. "It states that Catherine withdrew for personal reasons. There's a note indicating that if any issues arose, the school should contact Edna L., Catherine's mother. But that's all I see, nothing about where she went afterward." Bailey absorbed this information with a mix of relief and frustration. "Do you remember anything else about Catherine? Was she in trouble, or was she forced out?" Ms. Dunley frowned. "Not trouble exactly. She was always polite and eager to learn. However, I recall a rumor that her boyfriend's family disapproved of her. Some tension about the baby. I never had the details, but one day she just vanished." Glancing at the photograph again, Miss Dunley's eyes softened. "You look so much like her, especially around the eyes. I'm sorry I can't offer more." Despite the limited information, Bailey felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Dunley. This helps more than you know." All day, Bailey moved through her classes in a haze of introspection. Catherine had been a normal student, not some irresponsible runaway. The mention of a boyfriend's family who disapproved made Bailey's mind turn to Russell. Could her father have been that boyfriend, and was it his family who orchestrated Catherine's departure? After school, she sprinted to the bus station, lingering near the bench and the cart. Al wasn't there, and neither was Edna's cart. Someone must have taken it away. Feeling a surge of disappointment, Bailey headed home under a sky darkening with the promise of rain. At dinner, the tension was palpable. Margot forced a smile, pretending everything was fine, while Russell seemed trapped in his own thoughts. Bailey hardly touched her food. She rehearsed the conversation she wanted to initiate with her father, but couldn't find the right moment or the right courage to start. Later that night, Bailey sat in her room, sifting through Edna's notebook again. A new detail caught her eye. A reference to a place called Rose Gardens Nursing Center. The page read, "Visited Catherine at Rose Gardens. She's not well. Russell doesn't know." That final line sent chills through Bailey. Was her mother in a nursing center all this time? Why hadn't Russell told her? Her mind churned with questions. She had to find Rose Gardens Nursing Center. She typed it into a small, outdated laptop she occasionally used for schoolwork. Sure enough, she found a listing for a facility about a half-hour's drive away. Heart pounding, Bailey quickly scribbled down the address and phone number. She had no idea how she would get there. She was only 8 after all, but the knowledge that Catherine might be alive, possibly unwell, ignited a fierce resolve in her. At breakfast the next day, she mustered the nerve to ask Russell, "Dad, is there someone named Edna in our family?" Her voice trembled with the question. Russell almost dropped his coffee mug. "Why would you ask that?" he said. a nervous edge in his tone. Bailey took a deep breath. "I found some documents that say Catherine, my mum, had a mother named Edna, and I found a reference to a place called Rose Gardens. Do you know anything about that?" Margot's eyes darted between them. "Bailey, this isn't appropriate breakfast conversation," she scolded. Russell set down his mug with a clink, refusing to meet Bailey's gaze. "We'll talk later," he said stiffly, and left the kitchen. Bailey knew later would probably never come. She collected her backpack, feeling more isolated than ever, but beneath her frustration lay a fierce determination. If her father wouldn't help, she'd find Rose Gardens on her own, or figure out a way to get answers. Catherine wasn't just a name in a hushed conversation. She was Bailey's mother, and if Edna was truly her grandmother, she deserved a chance to know her family. Saturday rolled around again, offering Bailey the freedom she needed to investigate Rose Gardens Nursing Center. She gathered all her clues, Edna's notebook, the recipe book with Catherine's scribbles, the old photograph, and stashed them in her backpack. Then she told Margot she was going to a friend's house. The lie made her stomach twist, but she saw no other way. She took the city bus with the little money she had saved from allowances. The journey felt endless, each stop along unfamiliar streets. Eventually, a crackling speaker announced, "Next stop, Rose Gardens Boulevard." Bailey got off feeling a wave of nervous energy. The nursing center stood behind a manicured lawn, a sprawling complex of pale brick buildings connected by glass corridors. A brass sign read, "Rose Gardens Nursing and Rehabilitation." Inside the lobby, Bailey was nearly overwhelmed by the scent of disinfectant and the steady hum of wheelchair wheels. A receptionist with a friendly smile asked if she needed help. Bailey's voice trembled, but she mustered, "I'm looking for someone named Catherine. She might be here." "Catherine L." To her surprise, the receptionist nodded. "Let me check our system." After a few clicks on the computer, she said, "We do have a Catherine L. She's in the extended care ward. Are you family?" Bailey swallowed hard. I'm her daughter." The receptionist raised an eyebrow but then shrugged, possibly assuming Bailey was speaking figuratively. She pointed down a hallway lined with framed landscapes. "Wing C, room 213. I'll buzz you through." Bailey's heart pounded as she walked the corridors. Elderly residents moved about, some pushing walkers, others engaged in quiet conversation. Nurses offered gentle smiles. The atmosphere was a mixture of hope and lingering sadness. Outside room 213, Bailey paused. Her palms were sweaty, her mind racing with the question, what if Catherine didn't recognize her? She knocked lightly and opened the door. The room was modest, with floral curtains and a single bed near the window. A thin woman sat in a wheelchair, staring at a television that played an old black-and-white movie. Her hair was graying, pulled into a loose ponytail, and her cheeks were sunken. Yet Bailey saw a striking resemblance, the shape of the nose, the line of the jaw. This had to be Catherine. Stepping closer, Bailey's eyes brimmed with tears. "Mom?" she whispered. The woman turned her head slowly. For a moment, there was confusion in her gaze, followed by a flicker of recognition or perhaps longing. She murmured something that sounded like "baby," then reached out a trembling hand. Bailey wanted to rush into her arms, but she wasn't sure if that was welcome. Instead, she gently placed her palm against Catherine's. Catherine's lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes glistened with tears. She leaned forward, almost collapsing from the effort, and Bailey supported her shoulders. A nurse hurried in. "Oh, I didn't realize she had a visitor. Are you family?" Her tone was both curious and cautious. "Yes," Bailey managed to say, her voice quavering. I'm her daughter, Bailey." The nurse looked a bit stunned, glancing at Catherine, who nodded feebly. "Catherine has been here for a while," the nurse explained gently. "She has episodes of deep confusion, struggles with memory, but she improves when someone from her past visits." It's rare that she has visitors, though. She's mentioned the name Edna many times, but we've never met the woman. Bailey felt a pang. Edna, I think she's my grandmother. I've been trying to find her too. The nurse gave a sympathetic smile. We have a file on Catherine's background, but it's limited. She was admitted for long-term care due to mental health challenges. Something about postpartum complications and stress. It's likely she never fully recovered. Sitting beside the wheelchair, Bailey and Catherine held hands. Catherine occasionally stroked Bailey's hair, her gaze filled with a longing that words couldn't capture. Bailey felt tears trickle down her face as she realized her mother hadn't truly abandoned her. Life's circumstances, maybe orchestrated by others, had led her here. In that quiet moment, Catherine mustered a few whispered words. Red backpack. Edna said, "You had a red backpack." Bailey's chest tightened. Her mother's memories were fragmented, but they aligned with Edna's notes about seeing her granddaughter with the red backpack. Bailey spent an hour in the room, telling Catherine about the bus station, the homemade candies, and the note from Edna. Catherine would occasionally nod, tears glistening, but her voice was too strained to respond fully. The nurse advised that Catherine needed rest, so Bailey reluctantly said goodbye, promising to come back. As she left the nursing center, a swirl of emotions engulfed her. Relief at finally meeting her mother, anger at those who hid Catherine away, and heartbreak for the years they had lost. She also felt a renewed urgency about Edna. If Catherine was here, mentally fragile but alive, what had become of the grandmother who tried so hard to reunite them? Bailey hopped onto the bus home, the city lights blurring past the windows. She replayed the encounter in her mind, feeling more certain than ever that Russell had withheld vital information. That night, she paced her room, forming a plan. She needed to confront her father, but she had to be prepared with evidence. Letters, the recipe book, Edna's notebook, everything that pointed to the truth. Though she was young, Bailey felt a fierce resolve burn within her. Catherine deserved a chance at real connection, and Edna deserved recognition for the sacrifices she had made. The puzzle was gradually coming together, and Bailey would not stop until she uncovered every last piece. Bailey stood in the living room, her heart hammering. Russell and Margot were seated on the couch, perplexed by her insistent demand for a family meeting. The aroma of leftover pasta mingled with the tension in the air. Bailey had placed Edna's notebook and Catherine's recipe book on the coffee table, along with the photograph of Catherine holding her as an infant. "I need the truth," Bailey said, her voice trembling yet resolute. "I went to Rose Gardens Nursing Center. Mom is there. She's alive, and she's been sick all this time. And Edna, the old woman you let the police take away, she's my grandmother, right?" Russell's face went ashen, while Margot's turned red with anger. "Bailey," Margot snapped, "how dare you sneak off like that? You could have been in danger." "You left me no choice," Bailey shot back. "Nobody tells me anything. Mum didn't abandon me, did she? She was forced out. And Dad, you let it happen. Why?" Russell tried to speak, but only a strangled sound emerged. Finally, he said, "It's complicated. Catherine had issues. She wasn't stable after you were born." "That's not the whole story," Bailey retorted, tears brimming. "I've seen her. She might struggle, but she recognized me. She kept mentioning the red backpack that Edna told her about. If she'd truly abandoned me, why would she remember those details?" Margot exhaled loudly, jumping to her feet. "Fine. You want the truth? I told your father that if Catherine came back, I'd leave. I couldn't handle the baggage, her mental breakdowns, the constant drama, so yes, we kept quiet." She glared at Russell, who hung his head in shame. "You threatened him," Bailey whispered, lips trembling. "And what about Edna? She tried to gain custody. She wrote letters, she tried to see me, but you blocked her, didn't you?" Russell finally met Bailey's gaze, eyes filled with regret. Edna never approved of me from the start, he said in a broken voice. She thought I wasn't good enough for Catherine. When Catherine's mental health declined after childbirth, Edna blamed me. I was terrified I'd lose you if she took me to court. So I used the fact that Catherine had postpartum psychosis to gain full custody. I even manipulated documents. I'm not proud of it. Bailey's cheeks were hot with rage and sorrow. She was your wife, Dad. You were supposed to help her, not lock her away and hide me from my own grandmother. Margot folded her arms. We did what we thought was best at the time, she said defensively. Catherine was unstable. We had resources. Your father had a stable job. I was there to help. We believed you'd have a better life. Better life? Bailey echoed, voice quivering. Then why do I feel so broken right now? Tears spilled down her cheeks. All this time, you let me think my mom walked away from me, that she just didn't care. But she was sick. And Edna, she's been in town, watching over me, giving me candy, hoping for a chance to speak to me. You had no right to deny her that. Russell buried his face in his hands. Margot looked away, unwilling to apologize. Finally, Russell spoke through muffled sobs. I'm sorry, I panicked. I thought if Catherine came back, it'd unravel everything. I never meant for it to go this far. Bailey's mind reeled. Part of her felt pity. Her father was a flawed man, clearly racked by guilt. But the deeper ache came from the realization that his fear stole her life with her mother and possibly her grandmother's final years. She said in a quiet, trembling tone, I want to see Mom. I want to help her. She's in a home and she's lonely. You're going to help me do that, or I'll never forgive you. Margot slammed her fist on the table, sending the photograph skittering to the floor. And what about me, Bailey? Am I supposed to just watch you welcome that woman back into your life after all the turmoil she caused? Yes, Bailey declared. You are, because it's the right thing to do. A tense silence followed. Russell stared at the floor. Margot huffed in frustration. Bailey knelt down to pick up the photograph of her mother. She rose, looking directly into her father's eyes. Edna tried to see me, but she was living on the streets, she said, voice wavering. She died alone, didn't she? Or at least she's gone. She left me a notebook. She left me recipes. She was never the monster you made her out to be. Margot opened her mouth as if to argue, then shut it abruptly. The reality was too undeniable now. Tears stained Russell's cheeks. I swear if I could go back, he whispered. I just didn't know how to handle it. My family told me Catherine would ruin my life, that Edna was manipulative, and I believed them. God, what have I done? Bailey swallowed hard. Then make it right, Dad. Help me take care of Mom. She's in that nursing center and she's not well. I need her, and maybe she needs me. She waited, heart pounding as Russell seemed to weigh her words. Finally, he nodded, voice tight with emotion. Yes, I'll fix this. I don't know how, but I'll try. Margot stood there, arms crossed, refusing to meet Bailey's eyes. In that moment, Bailey realized that her stepmother might never accept Catherine or Edna's place in their lives. But at least Russell was willing to face the truth. With shaky resolve, Bailey wiped her tears and collected the notebooks from the table. She wasn't sure if this step would truly mend their broken family, but it was a start, the first honest step they had taken in years. The day after her explosive confrontation with Russell and Margot, Bailey found herself standing in the musty basement once again. She had only briefly rummaged through Edna's trunk before. Now, she needed to search thoroughly for anything that might shed more light on her grandmother's life and her death. Flicking on the bare bulb overhead, Bailey approached the chest. She carefully lifted the lid, coughing at the dust that rose. Inside lay old letters, photographs, and a faded crocheted baby blanket embroidered with the initials B.N., Bailey Nelson. Tears pricked her eyes as she realized Edna must have made it shortly after her birth. Then she saw a manila envelope labeled in neat handwriting, "Court Documents." She opened the envelope to find copies of letters Edna had written to child services, lawyers, and even Russell. Each letter pleaded for a chance to see Bailey, citing her concerns about Catherine's mental health and her desire to ensure Bailey's well-being. In one particularly heart-wrenching note, Edna wrote, "I am not asking to take Bailey away permanently. I only want her to know she's loved on all sides." Bailey felt a stab of guilt. Edna had loved her, tried everything within her power, and ended up on the streets, forced to watch from a distance. The thought weighed heavily. Her hands trembled as she tucked the letters into her backpack. She needed to show them to Russell, to drive home the reality of how his choices had hurt everyone. Upstairs, Russell was in the living room, pacing by the window, phone clutched in his hand. He looked worn and haunted. When Bailey approached with the letters, he sank onto the couch. One by one, Bailey placed them in his lap. Silently, he read, tears dripping onto the pages. "God," he whispered, voice breaking. "She never stopped trying. You let her be taken away like that, Dad," Bailey said softly. "They put her in a patrol car and she was calling out for me. Now she's gone. I don't even know where she ended up, if she's alive. But part of me feels she's not." Russell's shoulders shook. "After we parted ways years ago, I assumed Edna would move on. I had no idea she was still in town living like that. I was scared, Bailey. Scared she'd take you away. Scared she'd prove I was a terrible father. But I see now that fear blinded me." Before Bailey could respond, Margot entered, arms folded. "What's all this drama?" she demanded, eyeing the letters. "We're reading what Edna wrote," Bailey replied firmly. "You should read them too." Margot merely shook her head. "I have no interest in dredging up the past." Her lips twisted with disapproval. Bailey felt a surge of anger but held it back. She realized Margot's stubbornness was just another barrier in this tangled mess. Moments later, Russell stood. "I'm going out," he announced. "I need to find where Edna was taken. The city must have records of homeless individuals processed that day." Bailey's heart lifted slightly at his determination. "Can I come?" she asked, eyes full of quiet hope. Russell paused, studying the tear-streaked face of his daughter. "Yes," he said, managing a faint smile. "Let's do this together." They drove to the downtown police station under a cloudy sky that threatened rain. The building loomed, with imposing grey walls and neon signage flickering near the entrance. Inside, an officer greeted them with polite indifference. Russell explained that they were searching for a missing family member, an older woman recently taken into custody for vagrancy. The officer typed away at a computer terminal. "Name?" he asked. "Edna L." Russell replied softly. "She was picked up near the suburban bus station last week." The officer scanned the database. "We took a woman named Edna L to a local shelter. She didn't stay more than one night before leaving. No further record after that." Bailey's shoulders sagged. Another dead end, but Russell pressed on. "Do you know which shelter?" The officer gave them an address for Hope House, a modest shelter on the other side of town. Without wasting time, father and daughter headed there. They found the building in a run-down neighborhood, paint peeling off the walls. Inside, rows of cots lined a large hall, mostly occupied by people trying to stay warm. A soft-spoken volunteer listened to their story, then flipped through a handwritten ledger. "Edna L. Yes, she stayed here briefly. She left early the next morning. Claimed she had somewhere important to be. I'm sorry, that's all we have." Bailey felt tears threaten again. "Please, if she left any note or message." She trailed off. The volunteer sighed. "She did mention a grandchild, said she had to fix something with a granddaughter, but then she disappeared. We have no forwarding information." Russell slumped against the wall, remorse etched on his face. "She might still be on the streets or..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Bailey bit her lip, recalling the desperate look on Edna's face the last time she saw her. They returned home in silence. Margot was in the kitchen, but neither of them spoke to her. That night, as Bailey lay in bed, she stared at the photograph of Catherine with baby Bailey. She wondered where Edna had gone after leaving the shelter. Did she try to find Bailey again? Was she ill, lost, or wandering the cold streets? A shiver of dread crept through her. Early the next morning, Russell knocked on Bailey's door, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have done more a long time ago. We'll keep looking." She nodded, appreciating that he finally understood the weight of his choices, but an unshakable feeling told her that time was slipping away, and Edna's fate might already be sealed. She closed her eyes, remembering the warmth of Edna's candy, the gentle way she'd say, "Good morning, dear." Even if they never found her, Bailey vowed to honor Edna's effort by taking care of Catherine. Edna's love would not vanish into nothing. She would ensure it lived on, no matter how difficult the path ahead. Over the next few days, Russell surprised Bailey by embracing the idea of helping Catherine. Together, they visited Rose Garden's nursing center, determined to make amends for lost time. The first visit was awkward. Catherine was guarded, her eyes flickering with uncertainty when Russell entered her room. She recognized Bailey as "my sweet girl," but her expression clouded at the sight of her former partner. "Catherine," Russell said softly, hands trembling. I don't know if you remember me. We were young. I messed up. But I'm here now." He swallowed hard, voice catching. "I'm sorry." Catherine stared at him for a long moment, then shifted her gaze to Bailey. Finally, she spoke, her voice wavering. Where is my mother?" Bailey's heart clenched. She had no easy answer. Unable to lie, Bailey said, "She was taken away by the police. We think she left a shelter. We've tried to find her, but she hasn't turned up." The anguish in Catherine's eyes was immediate. She raised a trembling hand to her face, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Edna never gave up on me," she whispered. "She was the only one who believed I could get better." Russell stepped closer, gently placing a hand on Catherine's shoulder. "We'll keep searching, I swear," he said. It was a vow tinged with desperation. Catherine nodded, her expression torn between longing and mistrust. As days passed, Bailey visited more frequently. She brought small tokens, a stuffed animal, a puzzle book, even the crocheted blanket Edna had made with BN embroidered. Each time, Catherine's face lit with a shy spark of recognition. Bailey learned that Catherine's memory often wavered, drifting in and out of clarity, but her love for Bailey shone through. One afternoon, Bailey found Catherine sitting in the center's garden, gazing at the roses. "Mom," Bailey ventured hesitantly, "what really happened back then?" Catherine's grip tightened on the arm of her wheelchair. She explained that after Bailey was born, she spiraled into depression. She felt suffocated and alone, with Russell's family blaming her, pushing her to go. Edna tried to intervene, but Catherine's fragile state led to a psychiatric admission. When she was discharged, Russell had taken Bailey, leaving no trace. Catherine was too unwell to fight. Tears rolled down Bailey's cheeks. Everything her father did, he did out of panic, but it had robbed them both. She gently kissed Catherine's forehead. "I'm here now," she promised. "I won't let you be alone again." Catherine's shoulders sagged in relief. Russell tried as well. He brought Catherine flowers, sat awkwardly by her bed, telling her stories of Bailey's childhood. Sometimes Catherine smiled. Other times she seemed distant, haunted by regrets. Yet the fragile glimmer of hope remained, that piece by piece their family might mend. Meanwhile, Bailey continued searching for Edna. She phoned shelters and hospitals across the city, only to be met with dead ends. She began to fear the worst, that her grandmother had succumbed to the harsh conditions of life on the streets. Each unsuccessful lead weighed heavier on her, overshadowing even the tender moments with Catherine. One evening, Catherine clutched Bailey's hand, whispering, "Remember the bus station." Confused, Bailey pressed for details. Catherine explained that in a moment of relative lucidity some years ago, she had seen Edna outside a bus station. Catherine tried to call out, but the staff at the facility hurried her back inside, scolding her for wandering. Since then, Catherine would dream of that bench, longing for a chance to speak to Edna again. In Catherine's room, a crocheted pillow rested on a small chair, the only personal item Catherine had. It was embroidered with E and C. Bailey realized it must have been Edna's final gift before things fell apart. The sight of it caused Bailey's heart to ache with a longing for a grandmother she barely knew. Russell began confiding in Bailey, admitting the depth of his guilt. He recalled how Edna once confronted him outside the hospital, telling him he was making a terrible mistake. "I was so angry back then," Russell said quietly. "I felt judged and powerless. I made choices to protect you, but I see now I was protecting myself." Bailey placed her hand on his arm, empathy mingling with sadness. "There's still a chance to do better," she said. "For me, for Mom, and maybe for Edna if she's out there." Days bled into weeks. Each visit to Catherine's side grew warmer, more intimate. Catherine slowly built up the courage to smile again. She even said, "I love you, Bailey," one evening as they watched a thunderstorm roll past the window. It was the first time Bailey had heard those words from her mother's lips, and it felt like a fragile miracle. But the missing piece, Edna, remained. Late one afternoon, Bailey tried calling that smudged phone number again, though it had never worked. To her shock, this time a tired voice answered. Heart pounding, Bailey asked, "Is Edna there?" The voice on the other end answered, "I'm sorry, who?" Bailey repeated her question, and the woman responded that Edna had been at this halfway house but left, leaving a small box behind with instructions for "my granddaughter, if she calls." Bailey's jaw dropped. She scribbled the address and thanked the woman profusely. It was a slender thread of hope, but enough to send her heart racing. She rushed downstairs to tell Russell. "We have an address. Edna left something for me. We need to go now." Russell grabbed his keys without hesitation. Margot shot them a perplexed look, but said nothing as father and daughter hurried out the door. Bailey's chest felt tight with anticipation. If Edna had left a box, it meant she was still thinking of her. Maybe that box held answers, or at the very least a final message from a grandmother she feared was lost forever. The address led them to a weathered brick apartment building in a part of town Bailey had never visited. A sign out front indicated it was a transitional housing facility where people could stay briefly while searching for stable accommodations. Russell parked, and they climbed the chipped concrete steps to a door labeled Office. Inside, a middle-aged woman greeted them with a concerned look. "You must be Bailey," she said softly. "I'm Helena, the coordinator here. I have a box Edna left, saying you might call. She was in rough shape, but she insisted on leaving this for her granddaughter." Bailey felt her heart pound as Helena reached under the desk, retrieving a small cardboard box taped shut. On top, in wavering handwriting, read, "For Bailey." With trembling fingers, Bailey tore the tape. She carefully lifted the flaps and saw a folded piece of paper, a battered photograph, and something wrapped in cloth. She opened the paper first. The note was shaky but legible. "My dearest granddaughter, if you find this, it means I couldn't give it to you myself. I tried. I truly did. You deserve to know I loved you every single day. Forgive me for not being able to do more. Your mother was my only child, and you, Bailey, are the light that kept me going. Love, Edna." Tears streamed down Bailey's face. She handed the paper to Russell, who read it with moist eyes. "She was always thinking of you," he whispered, voice cracking. Then Bailey picked up the photograph. It showed a much younger Edna in a floral dress, holding a baby in her arms. The baby wore a tiny crocheted cap. In the background stood a younger Russell, looking uneasy, perhaps only 17 or 18. A wave of emotion crashed over Bailey as she realized this was likely the earliest photo of all three generations, before everything crumbled. Finally, she unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small handcrafted doll, with patchwork fabric for hair and buttons for eyes. On its chest were stitched the letters BN. Tucked into a seam was a tiny audio recorder. Bailey's hands trembled as she pressed the play button. A faint voice crackled through. "Bailey, it's me, Grandma. If you hear this, please never doubt I wanted to hold you in my arms. See you grow. Share your joys. Life took me down a road I never planned, but my love for you never died. I hope someday you can forgive me for not being the grandmother you deserved." The recording ended abruptly. Bailey's sobs echoed in the small office. Even Russell, stoic as he tried to be, wept quietly. Helena offered them tissues. "Edna left shortly after dropping off this box," she explained. "She said she had to make peace somewhere. We tried to keep her longer, but she was determined." Bailey looked at her father, voice trembling. "Dad, do you think we'll ever see her again?" Russell shook his head sadly. "I don't know, sweetheart, but if she's still out there, we'll keep looking." Returning home, Bailey felt hollow, yet oddly comforted. She had at least one final message from her grandmother. She spent the next day visiting Catherine, carefully showing her the photograph. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, recognition flickering in her gaze as she touched the image of Edna. "My mother," she murmured, voice catching. "She never gave up." Bailey placed the doll in Catherine's lap, along with the letter, letting her mother feel Edna's presence. Catherine cradled the doll, tears slipping down her cheeks. She nodded at Bailey with a sad, grateful smile. Though her voice faltered, it was clear she understood the significance. In the weeks that followed, Russell put the house up for sale, telling Bailey he wanted to move closer to Rose Gardens so they could visit Catherine more easily. Margot threw a fit, eventually leaving, muttering about how she refused to build a life around a broken family. Russell's shoulders sagged, but Bailey saw a quiet resolve in his eyes. He was done living with secrets and lies. A month later, Catherine showed notable improvement. She began speaking more coherently, even going for short walks in the facility's courtyard. Bailey accompanied her, pushing the wheelchair when Catherine grew tired. They admired the budding flowers, feeling the promise of renewal. Sometimes Catherine would clutch the doll Edna made, pressing the little recorder to replay that gentle, loving voice. During one such walk, Catherine reached for Bailey's hand. "If Mom comes back, we'll both be waiting for her, won't we?" she asked softly. Bailey nodded. "Yes, we'll never stop hoping." Although they never located Edna's exact whereabouts, rumors drifted of an elderly woman matching her description appearing at various churches, soup kitchens, and parks in neighboring towns. Bailey sensed that Edna was out there, continuing her quiet vigil in the only way she knew how, giving out candies, possibly whispering stories about a granddaughter she adored from afar. Time passed, and Bailey flourished under the new arrangement. She felt closer to her father, who was genuinely trying to redeem himself. Catherine's health stabilized, allowing them real conversations about the lost years. They laughed over the caramel recipes and cried over memories that never got a chance to happen. On a crisp autumn evening, Bailey sat with Catherine in her room, the doll perched on the bedside table. Catherine pressed the recorder one last time. Edna's voice poured out, bringing tears to their eyes. When the message ended, Catherine gently clasped Bailey's hand. "Your grandma had a strong spirit," she said, her voice steady. "She gave us a second chance at being a family, even from afar." That night, Bailey dreamed of the bus station illuminated by golden sunlight. She saw Edna on the bench, smiling. Instead of looking sad or desperate, Edna seemed peaceful. She waved at Bailey, who ran forward with a laugh, but before Bailey could reach her, The dream dissolved like morning mist. Bailey woke up teary-eyed yet hopeful. She understood that Edna's love transcended physical presence. In her heart, she carried the unbreakable bond that grandmother, mother, and child share. Even if they never found Edna again, the memory of her devotion lived on, ensuring that the family ties Edna fought so hard to preserve would endure for generations to come. In the end, Bailey didn't just rediscover her family, she rebuilt it from silence, shame, and secrets. Her journey proved that love, even when buried beneath years of pain, never truly dies. Edna's quiet sacrifices and Catherine's long-forgotten voice remind us that sometimes the loudest love is the one that says nothing, but never stops trying. This story is a tribute to every unspoken hug, every missed chance, and every heart that waited in silence, hoping to be remembered. How many times in life have we misjudged someone's absence when it was actually their quiet form of love? What did you think of this story? Share your feelings in the comments. Your voice matters here. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Click the notification bell. Like this video if it touched your heart, and tell us in the comments which country or city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. And most importantly, don't miss the next story. Click on the card that just appeared on your screen. Thank you for being here with us. You are what keeps these stories alive.